do you love Japan or not? To move to Japan without loving it is a mistake. The cost is very attractive. Is it a great opportunity to make a ton of money? No, it's a lifestyle choice. I honestly don't recommend getting a job in Japan unless it's with like a foreign company. You can't just show up in Japan and start making money. You won't get as much money and you won't spend as much money. It's kind of a toss-up.
Welcome to Unpacking Japan. I'm Toby, and today we welcome Nick, founder of Japan Remotely, a company that helps foreigners from all over the world, but especially the United States, move to Japan and find their place here and kind of understand what it's like to really live in Japan. Thank you so much for coming today. And we're going to have a slightly different conversation as we usually do because you actually don't live in Japan anymore. After
That's right.
10 years here in Japan, you've decided to relocate back to the United States. And we're going to get into that because I think it's an interesting story too. But to go back to the beginning, what has gotten you interested in Japan in the first place many years ago?
Well, the first time I got really seriously interested in Japan was in high school. And I went for 1 week with a sister city program to the island of Shikoku.
Oh.
Yeah. And it was really eye-opening. Shikoku has such a special and unique culture. And we got to go to like a vine bridge where the ninjas used to like cut it down and
is this
on their
in
escapes.
Iya Valley?
Exactly,
Yeah.
in the Iya Valley, yeah. And I also really enjoyed the language here. I had a CD cassette that I was listening to, and I was like, "Toire wa doko desu ka?" And I'm like repeating those. And after I got back, I really wanted to study more. And so I was about a junior in high school then, which is year 3 for those of us in the different parts of the world. But after that, I wanted to go to university and study Japanese.
So you majored in Japanese
So
after high school?
I was like interdisciplinary. It was called International Studies, which is like a bunch of different topics like economics and culture and things like that. But part of it was that we had a focus on a certain language, and there were people doing Spanish or Chinese or Russian, and I picked Japanese.
And eventually you decided to move back, to pack your things, come back to Japan and like kind of live here for the long term, not just for a school trip to Shikoku.
Yeah. It kind of came in stages, I think. While I was studying at university, I came to study abroad in Japan and did that for about 6 months. And that was a lot of fun. And then after going back to the States, kept taking Japanese. And around the time I graduated was the Great Recession. And so I really didn't know what to do. And so I decided to go into business school right away. And so I did my MBA. And then after my MBA, the economy was still not great. But I heard about this program inside the JET program where you didn't have to teach English, which I wasn't really into the idea of doing that.
Wait a second. I thought the JET program was like an English teaching program.
It is, but there are actually 3 jobs you can get on the JET program. English teaching is by far the biggest. 90% of the program is English teaching. But the other 2, there's one that's called a coordinator for international relations, which was what I did. And in Japanese, that's kokusai koryuin. And to get that job, you have to have a certain fluency in Japanese. And a lot of people who do that end up doing some translation for local governments, or they help Japanese communities connect to international organizations like sister cities, like what I did before, or even like UNESCO programs where they kind of liaise between these communities and international groups like that. And then the third one is one I was not involved in, but just so we have all 3 of them, is actually sports. So if you are good at a certain sport like volleyball or baseball, I think it's like you can be a coach or something. Someone will have to fact check me on what exactly it entails, but it's a very small part of it.
That's really cool. I had no idea you could actually do these different things.
Yeah.
So what does it entail? You went into this international coordinator position. What is it like?
So that's the funny thing. And this is one of the problems about getting a job in general, but especially in Japan, is that even if your job title says a certain thing, once you actually arrive, you have to do whatever your hiring organization requires of you. So I had heard about this great program, and I was like, oh yeah, I could go like to France or something and bring with Japanese people, although I don't speak French, so maybe they wouldn't choose me for that kind of position. But it just all depends on where you are. And where I was, they needed absolutely nothing international from me.
Okay.
So despite getting selected and doing Japanese tests and all this stuff, when I actually got there, the first thing they had me do is go to the little preschools around and play with the kids in the pools. And then once the school year started, it was standard assistant language teacher stuff.
Okay.
So at first I was really disappointed. I was like, oh man. But so yeah, I definitely feel like at the time I felt like I was duped. Like I had these high expectations and was qualified to do these things. I mean, I was about JLPT level N2 then. And, I just gotten my MBA. So I had studied about how to manage nonprofit organizations and government organizations. This was kind of part of the program. So I was excited to use those skills and bummed that I didn't actually get to do any of that.
In which area of Japan were you then?
I was in Tottori.
Okay, so basically still a rural area, similar to the Shikoku experience you had back at the beginning.
In the end, I kind of leaned into it. I spent a few months kind of trying to fight it. Like I talked to the organizers in my area and was like, hey, this is what happened. And in the end, they said, look, you can fight this. And the likely outcome is that you'll just have to go home because the JET program isn't the one that hired you. The one that hired you is this little town. And if you leave, there might not be another place that needs a kokusai coordinator for international relations. So I think I got closure then and then had a lot of fun. So it's not as well known, but in Tottori, they have a mountain called Mount Daisen.
Yeah.
And it's probably the biggest ski area in the Chugoku region of Japan. And we had a huge snow year that year. So I think I must have went skiing maybe 12 times that year. It was so fun. And made all kinds of friends and really kind of leaned into the social side of the JET program.
But you weren't really doing what you came here to do
No.
and not really applying the skills you had learned.
Mm-hmm.
What made you want to stay and decide to okay, I'm going to just focus and dive deeper into Japan?
Usually involves a woman. So one of my ski buddies turned out to be this little snowboarder, and she'd only been doing it for a couple seasons. And I grew up in the Pacific Northwest, and I was on the ski team in high school, and so especially at the time, I was a little bit more
comfortable
in skis and less prone to injury. And so, I was doing things like jumping off cliffs and going off piste and powder runs. And, me and my buddy, other snowboarder guy, we were like, hey, we're going to go down this way. And this girl was like, oh yeah, I'm coming too. And I was like, really? And I jumped off the cliff, and then my buddy jumped off the cliff, and I was looking up at this girl. I was like, are you going to be okay? And she almost landed it. She kind of tumbled a little bit, but I was really impressed that she hung in there. So, I think if not for her, I probably would have done the JET program even longer, just because just having a blast socially. I would have just put my career to the side and had a good time, I think. But she had a job change, and she got an opportunity up in Tokyo, and I had just started my second year contract with JET, and she's like, we're going to be apart for 10 months. Are you going to come up to Tokyo or are you not? I was like, okay, I'll go. And so that's what kind of motivated me to change my career, because when it was time to go to Tokyo, I knew I didn't want to do English teaching anymore. Like we had done that. And so I decided to try to get into like the world of IT.
So how did you transition then to go from this English teaching position, which a lot of people nowadays are in, into a field like IT, which is very technical, requires usually advanced degrees and knowledge. And I think many people strive to kind of get out of teaching into a field like IT. How did you do that?
Well, it's kind of another funny story. I luckily knew Japanese, so I just went on job boards and researching. And then I also got into the world of recruiters and talking like actual Japanese recruiters. And I found this guy in Tokyo, and we seemed to get along pretty well. And his brother had just become CEO of their family business. And so they invited me up to interview, and this guy, he was about, I want to say like 32, 33, it's pretty chill. And they gave me a job offer. And, you know, I had explained to them that, you know, my expertise is in like the humanities side and also business. And I have business ideas. And they said, well, we're hiring for engineers right now. And I think, you know, you can grow into maybe some managerial stuff later, but let's just put you down as an engineer. It's like, oh, okay, whatever. I'll be an engineer on paper. But this time when I get up to Tokyo, they're like, all right, start engineering. I was like, but wait, I've never done any engineering ever. So that's another thing that's a little bit unique, I think, about Japanese companies versus Western companies, is to a degree, they're willing to train young people. And I remember when I was a high school student, I just graduated and I was like, well, maybe I could skip college. And so I applied straight to Google. And the recruiter was nice enough to email me back. And she was like, what exactly can you do? I was like, well, I had good grades. I want to work at Google. And she was like, well, you kind of have to have experience first. But in Japan, a lot of times it's the opposite, actually. Like they want a malleable brain that they bring in and do whatever. And so they put some coding in front of me and were like, use the internet, go learn to code. That didn't go very well for me.
That's a pretty big trust put into a newly hired employee, right?
Yeah.
To kind of pay a monthly salary, having them not knowing the skill they need for the job and just hoping that that person will learn it.
Yeah, it's an interesting system. And I think it would have went better for somebody that had at least some background in, IT. But we kind of pivoted and I started focusing more on business problems that they had. And I would notice issues and bring up unique ways to solve them. And one of the first things I was talking to the CEO about is he was frank. And one of the reasons they hired me is because they couldn't hire anyone else. They have a big labor problem in Japan. And this was a real small company, like obviously like mom and pop, and mom and pop retired. And this younger guy took over and he's like, well, the guys from Todai and Waseda, they're not coming here. Like we're getting like the dregs of Japanese hires.
Yeah, from the big universities, they all want to go to the big corporations.
Exactly.
And then the small companies are like struggling kind of to find for talent. But today is still a similar problem.
Oh yeah, even worse today, I bet. And so a little bit similar to Zen Group, I had the idea that what if we hired ex-Jets and we brought on people that maybe had diverse backgrounds and we figured out something that we could do together. And so that was a really fun project. And that's a little bit like the impetus for starting Japan Remotely too, because I liked helping people stay in Japan and do things that they want to do.
How was it change for you from Tottori to Tokyo? Because you're moving from the least populated prefecture in Japan to the most populated city or urban area in the world.
That's another funny story. My now wife, so this girl who was my snowboarding buddy became my wife during that period of time. She's kind of a high-strung person, and already she's always doing something very busy. And when I came from Tottori to Tokyo, I kind of walked like this, like, oh, looking around and look at these tall buildings. And my wife would snap at me like, come on, like walk. And I was like, oh, trying to keep up and kind of stumbling along. But after a while, I started to get that like urban speed. New Yorkers are famous for being aggressive walkers. Like, I'm walking you. And Tokyo is very similar that, you've got to be on it and like, cross the street when you can and jump into the subway when you have a chance. Sit down on that seat before anybody else does.
Always in a rush.
Always in a rush. So I kind of got used to it, but it took some time.
10 years you spent in Japan, built your career there in IT, kind of growing and with your wife. But eventually you came to a point where you decided you want to leave out of Japan and back to the States. What kind of spurred that decision to move back?
Well, it is really true when they say that kids change everything. So we had our first child and all of our priorities shifted. We tried to do everything ourselves at first, and it was like really tough. Like all the crying and staying up late, and we had no idea what we were doing. And we have both of us have really great parents. My wife's got great parents, and so do I. And immediately they both jumped on planes and came to help us out. And we were so lucky that they were able to do that. But as our parents both get older, that's not really something they can continue to do, and it's not really sustainable. So one factor was the lack of family in Japan. And that's something that was important to us. Raising a child is having access to help and other people that really care. So that's kind of the personal side. On the career side, one thing that we were really lucky with living in Japan is that they have a really great opportunity, especially for women, to take a really long maternity leave. And so my wife took the full 2 years available to her. And during that time, it did give us some time to think about what to do after maternity leave. She had a job that she liked, but there's just no growth. And we were kind of joking around that, for her salary, even as like a manager of this small company, it's not too different from like a manager at a McDonald's in the United States.
Wow, that's quite a big contrast.
Yeah. And so obviously, we had heard about, but America's so expensive. It's not really apples to apples. But it did get us thinking when we start looking at the numbers. The other thing is that, we basically had 3 choices we were thinking about. 1, status quo. Stay in Japan, stay at the same job, and do the same thing. 2, stay in Japan, but have my wife change jobs and go to another Japanese company. And the third would be to change everything and move the whole family back to the United States. So option 1, we kind of talked about as kind of no growth and not sure we wanted to do that. Option 2, if we were going to switch, my wife was in the tourism sector. She would have probably gone to work for like a JTB or maybe go for one of the hotels like Mandarin Oriental, something like that. And she worked with those people, and we knew it was going to be some major hours, like the real karoshi, and having like a 2-year-old at home with that just wasn't in the cards. And even if she did that, I bet the increase in pay would have been marginal. So that's why I think that was the major factor for us on the career side, to really make a bet on her career and do something completely different in the United States.
So you make the decision to relocate the family to the US. for anyone that is maybe currently thinking about leaving Japan and so on,
Mm-hmm.
what are all the procedures you actually need to go through? Because, I mean, you have been here for 10 years. You've got bank accounts, you pay taxes, you contributed to the pension system, you have your rent, you have your children registered here.
Yeah.
Like, what do you have to go through to actually prepare and be able to get on a plane and move back?
I wouldn't say it's that big of a deal. I'd say coming to Japan is a lot harder, but leaving, of course, it's more complicated than moving from one city to another city. But as long as you have citizenship in the place you're going, I would say that was probably the biggest hurdle because my wife's not American. So we spent about a year prepping to get her green card. That was probably the biggest issue and hurdle. I think we timed it pretty well with our apartment. We might have had to pay a little exit fee, but shut down all the utilities and getting rid of all your stuff is a challenge. We were in Tokyo, so we used things like Facebook Marketplace and Facebook groups, and people came and got a lot of our stuff for free. We weren't too worried about it. It was mostly like IKEA stuff anyway. So,
are there any specific procedures you need to do in terms of like registrating that you're leaving the country, that you're not going to be living here anymore? Is it basically you just go to the immigration, you say you're leaving, and you're not coming back?
Yeah, exactly. They're like, okay, bye.
All right.
So
Pretty
that's
uneventful.
pretty uneventful. They stamp a little card through your Zairyu Kado, and that's it.
Little hole,
Yeah.
and then you can't use it anymore.
Yeah.
And then you're no longer a resident.
Yeah.
So you moved back to the States. Your wife is kind of developing a new career there, and you decide to somehow, somewhere along the way, start Japan remotely.
Yeah.
You were saying earlier that the idea kind of came a little bit as you were working with your IT company and you started helping other former JET members to find new careers in Japan.
Yeah.
Can you tell me more about how you started with Japan remotely, what it means for you?
Yeah. I think one of the big impetuses for starting Japan remotely is understanding how expensive life is in the United States. I had heard people joke like on the internet about, oh yeah, America's so expensive, ha ha ha, insurance is so bad. And I guess I didn't really internalize how severe the situation was. And so when I got to the States, that was a big shock, just how much money just goes out. And another thing that I was surprised about is how strategic with money you have to be. When we lived in Japan, we had like one joint savings account as like a Yucho Ginko. We just put money in the bank and paid our bills, and that's about it. Like in the States, and maybe it would have happened to us to a degree in Japan too. They have a similar system, but like we put a bunch of money away for our retirement and 401k. And then separately, we also have to have an account for if we ever get sick or injured. It's called a health savings account. And by the time you funnel all that money away, the actual working capital you have is a lot less than what you get on your paycheck. And so that was a big surprise for me, just how many buckets you need to have going, because there's not as much of a social safety net. You kind of have to build your own and have buckets in high yield savings account in case you lose your job, and you've got to have stocks in your 401k for when you retire, and other stocks in case you need to sell them off and pay other things.
And so that's one of the reasons why many people living in the States that are somewhat interested in Japan are considering relocating because of
the financial
lower cost of living.
aspect. Yeah, and I think also the stability. People in the United States, I think especially during the pandemic, they saw their cost of living just skyrocket, and happened to us too. And thankfully, they say it's slowing down a bit, but everybody's wages didn't really catch up after that huge spike. And so I think not only was it a culture shock coming back, but then kind of compounded by the pandemic, that I was thinking, people are going to have to start thinking about alternatives, especially when it comes to retiring. I was looking at our current rate of spending, and we have a very modest lifestyle. We live in the suburbs and try not to eat out too much. The main store we shop at is Costco. Get that Costco $5 chicken. Man, you're set for a few days because you get the chicken and then you separate out all the meat. And that's like, there's only 3 of us eating right now. We got a little kiddo too.
Can you find that Costco chicken here in Japan too?
I think so.
I'm not a Costco member, so I can't go check, but I'll have to see.
Yeah, they definitely have the pizza and the hot dogs here. I'm not sure about the chicken, but I bet they do. And it's a whole chicken and it's cooked. And so after that, like, we make soup out of it, and it can be like 3 or 4 days. So like, we're not major spenders is what I'm trying to get at. But it's still, if I look at the numbers and then think about if we're spending at that same rate during retirement, like, well, we're just going to burn right through it. And so that got me thinking about Japan again. And we would joke, like, we used to have this little jar of coins that we would collect, and they were the 500 yen coins, which back then was like $5. Like, one coin was $5. And
not anymore, though.
Not anymore. But we'd fill it up, and that would be like enough for a trip for us. But in the States, it just feels like it's so hard to pinch those pennies and actually have it amount to something.
So Japan remotely was kind of a problem that you were facing, and you kind of saw other people facing too, this kind of financial challenges of living in the United States at the moment. In Japan maybe being a solution for some people.
Yeah, and I started learning about this idea called FIRE, Financially Independent Retire Early. And to me, I was thinking, whoa, I speak Japanese and I know about life in Japan. So for me personally, I'm looking at Japan as a destination to be able to retire earlier than I would normally be able to. The quality of life here is great, especially if you are not necessarily working a 9 to 5 at a typical Japanese company. The healthcare quality is very good and accessible. But what I was finding is that there's no retirement visa in Japan, and getting a visa to support like a non-traditional work situation is also very difficult. And so I still had a bunch of contacts, of course, from living in Japan, including a Japanese immigration lawyer. And I would just send her crazy ideas. I'd be like, what if we did it like this way? And then I did this and that. And she's really great because the stuff that would absolutely not work, she'd say, no, Nick, let's not go down that path. But then sometimes she'd be like, well, if you did it like this way, then maybe it would work. And so it made me realize that although it's difficult to move to Japan and, not just have a job, like do something that you want to do, it's hard. But I think if you want to have that lifestyle, there are ways that I've found that you can work around and live in Japan the way you want to, rather than, how I first started, which is getting a job.
So you offer these consultation service, you offer your assistance for people to find their way.
Yeah.
What is a typical profile of the people that come and seek your help?
I think a lot of them are like me. They maybe have young families thinking about what to do with their kids. I've had people who are family planning, people who are interested in having children in Japan because it's so much cheaper and so much more stable than in the United States. One couple is planning to have a child, and the reason they want to do that is they really like the way Japanese children behave, and maybe they'll have a different experience once they're actually here. There's lots of issues with even international schools and Japanese schools. There's challenges to come over.
It's quite curious to me to hear, I don't know how much kind of experience these people have with Japan before, but it really seems like there's this idea of Japan as an alternative place to live. But I would assume that if you're an American citizen and a native English speaker, Japan is not the first thing that comes to mind, right? Because Japan has a very different language, and you could go up north to Canada, maybe even Mexico, or maybe try Europe with the UK, Australia. Japan is not the first choice, I think, if you want to live a different life, or is it?
It's interesting. It certainly has not been the first choice traditionally. I mean, there's a long history of Americans going down and retiring early in Mexico. That's been a very common thing. Costa Rica was like the second big destination for Americans, I feel like. And Panama is now really big too. Other destinations for Europeans include like Portugal and Spain or Greece, and to a degree, Italy now too. Those are all great options, but what I'll say is a lot of those places have been discovered. And there are mixed feelings about people going there, especially and raising the prices by being there. Just out of curiosity, while in the United States, I've looked at properties in Mexico and seeing how much it would be. And I've talked to a good friend who's an expat in Mexico about his life there. And the reality is, in a place like Mexico, or maybe even Costa Rica, Panama, to live a comfortable lifestyle in a safe place in Mexico, the cost difference really isn't that big from the United States. In some cases more, especially if you have kids, because similar to Japan, it's probably a good idea to send your kids to international school.
So what are some of these preconceptions, perhaps misconceptions that people have when they come to you and they're like, I want to move to Japan, I want to retire in Japan, and they maybe have the idea of, oh, it's going to be like that, or I can just go there and do that, but it's not really the case?
I think one of the big misconceptions is that moving to Japan is impossible. There's a lot of feelings that people have looking on the internet, and a lot of fear about the process. Like there's no way it can happen. I think number one, I try to give people confidence that if they have a real love of Japan and they really want to do it, that it is possible and they can. And I help them look through and try to find a realistic way, of course, to make sure that the lifestyle they're going after is going to make them happy and will make sense within their budget. But some people also come and have, now once they figure out, oh, it's possible, they maybe don't fully understand the opportunities around Japanese real estate is the next big thing. And that's a very big topic right now, is akiya real estate in Japan, and being able to buy a very low-cost home and live happily out in the countryside. Some people can do that. There's some great case studies of people buying akiya and living out in the country and having an alternative lifestyle. But I'd say that's more complicated. The houses that people see for like $5,000 or $7,000 or $0.
Yeah.
I know people who live in $0 akiya, and it's like a full-time job because you're constantly having to work at it. And there are cultural issues with living in very rural Japan. There are community expectations that are hard, not only for Westerners to understand, but even I've seen YouTube stories about, Japanese people from Tokyo or Osaka going down to Shikoku or some rural Gifu or something like that, and absolutely failing, being rejected by locals and having to leave. So I think there needs to be a moderate approach. I think that Tokyo is by far the most expensive choice you can choose to live in Japan. It's also the most convenient for foreign people. But I mean, even we're here in Osaka, I would argue that Osaka is around 50% cheaper than Tokyo. And there's many great resources in Osaka too. I mean, it's a wonderful city.
Before we dive more into like the real estate, because I think that's an interesting topic, and you just came from a real estate conference in
that's
Tokyo
right.
to visit us here. I want to just ask one more questions about the people about to move here, and considering this, what would you say are like the deciding factors they should consider to see if Japan is the right place for them or not?
That's a good question. I think the first one, like we talked about earlier, is, do you love Japan or not? I've had some people come to me who have never even been to Japan before. First step, go to Japan and as a tourist, experience it. Maybe spend a long trip, maybe even a month would be good, and go around to different places, experience it. I think to move to Japan without loving it is a mistake. Like we talked about, there's other options around the world if you wanted to have an expat lifestyle that maybe they don't have as unique a situation with real estate as Japan. I think Japan is very unique that way, and the cost is very attractive. But there's Thailand, there's Malaysia, there's a lot of choices you could think about. So I think that first they should think about, is Japan the number one place for me? And if that's the case, then a lot of the other stuff will come together. Another deciding factor is if you have kids or planning to have kids. Even for successful expats that live here, and I feel like once kids hit the middle school kind of age where they get a little bit feistier towards each other, I want to say 80% of my friends who are foreigners that live in Japan send their kids to some sort of international school once they hit middle school age.
What's the reason for that?
Middle school is already hard, right? Like it's so challenging. The hormones are going crazy. And I think it's also the time when bullying really gets to be a major issue. And if you're different, and you're foreign or even mixed race, even in places like Tokyo and Osaka, it can be very challenging in public schools. I myself never experienced that with my son because he was small when we moved. But for people who are thinking about moving with their kids, I have a list of all of the international schools in Japan on my website. I would think about maybe not going to someplace like Shikoku. What about going someplace like Tsukuba, which is a suburb outside of Tokyo? It's
Research town,
yeah. It's not as rural as Shikoku, and you won't get to see spirits or anything like that. But there is a lot of space, and you can have a bigger house, and you can have a couple cars. You can drive out to Nikko, and you can enjoy the countryside. But there's also a couple international schools close by, and there's a train line that can zip you right down into Tokyo if you need additional resources.
So once people decide Japan is the right place, they like it, they want to move there, this is probably the first big question they need to kind of answer, right? Mm-hmm. Where to move in Japan?
Yeah.
And you said Tokyo, definitely the most expensive option. Osaka, perhaps not that cheap either, but definitely less or cheaper than Tokyo. How do people choose where to go when they move to Japan? Where do you even start? Because there's so many options.
I think we start a lot of times with their business model. If they are coming to Japan and planning on launching some business, especially in the IT sector, or really planning to grow and wanting to have business success, I would say that the bigger cities are preferable. Especially Tokyo. And I worked in IT in Tokyo for 5 years, and so I'm a bit biased, but in Tokyo you have everything you need for international business. You've got all the resources there, and all of the major companies from Japan and international have offices in Tokyo. So I remember going with my boss, and we could just fill up our schedule all throughout the Tokyo area. We'd go to Toyota, we'd go to Mitsubishi, we'd go down to Dell, and we'd go out to the research centers. And we could do that all within a day. Now, living in America, all those places are all spread around. Mm-hmm. It's Houston, it's New York, it's Chicago, it's Colorado. Everything you have to go by plane. But Tokyo, I think, is a really special city because everything's so close by that you can really get a lot of progress quickly. So I try to get an understanding from them if they are trying to go gear up and make their careers really go to the next level, or their new business go to the next level, or if they're viewing Japan as more of a downshift or a type of FIRE, financially independent, retire early mm-hmm. situation, where maybe they have some investments or they have other business that they have that's maybe more passive that they can rely on for most of their money. And then maybe their entry into Japan is more something like unique, like buying an akiya. At this real estate conference, one of the presenters showed us an akiya in Shizuoka prefecture that someone had converted into a boxing gym that's outside.
Oh.
And there's so much creativity that can be done with these old buildings. It's a wonderful opportunity to do something new. Is it a great opportunity to make a ton of money? No, it's a lifestyle choice. So for people who are more interested in doing work for themselves, having an interesting lifestyle experience, and maybe have funds to the side that can support them financially, then maybe we start looking at more rural areas and going that path. But I think that's a big deciding factor is economics. Are you going up or are you slowing down?
Japan is not a country where you can just move to and do whatever you want.
That's right.
It's also a country that doesn't have a retirement visa.
Yeah.
And I feel like the people you're helping with mm-hmm. relocating to Japan are not interested in becoming employed by mm-hmm. A typical Japanese company. They're interested in being self-employed mm-hmm. and independent.
Yeah.
What kind of visa options are available for this, and how can people approach these to relocate here, maybe work remotely, work for themselves? Mm-hmm. What can they do?
So you're absolutely right. You can't just show up in Japan and start making money. I think first of all, we need to think about the definition of short-term and long-term visas. It is possible to visit Japan for long periods of time using a standard visa exemption. And you can do a lot of things in Japan over the course of 3 months, or even over the course of 6 months spread out through 1 year. Mm-hmm. One thing I help my clients decide is whether they see Japan as solely a place to relax and maybe have some passive investment is okay, or if they really want to have all of their finances tied up in Japan and really commit to being here. So that's the first thing we look at, because the visa exemption is very easy. You just show up and you can enjoy Japan as a tourist.
Tourist visa.
Mm-hmm, mm. Exactly. But for people who really want to move here, that's what you need a long-term visa for. And there are several categories that you can choose from. The two that I often focus on are the work visa or the business manager visa. So standard practice for people who want to open a business in Japan and maybe do something themselves is to go after the business manager visa. And essentially the way that works is you would open a company in Japan, and then that company would sponsor your visa. But it's very challenging. There's a lot of requirements, including the need to invest a certain amount of money in your company to start out with.
5 million yen, right?
Exactly, 5 million yen. Or you could have 2 employees. The next factor that I think a lot of my clients would struggle with is it needs to be revenue generating by the time you get there. It's like a chicken and the egg situation. So the Japanese government is going to want to see some history of you being able to perform this business, and ideally some purchase orders from customers even before they give you the visa. But how can you get purchase orders if you don't live in Japan to start the company, which is difficult. And then the third issue is that to start a company, you need to have an office space. That could be a rental office, or it could be a situation where you have something like a duplex where you have one part you live in and another part you have an office space. But you need to have all of those things together before you even get started, which is challenging. So one alternative that I've been working with my clients on is called a startup visa. And the startup visa is great because it allows you to delay those more difficult requirements for a number of months. The issue is that the startup visa is not a centralized program. Each city or each prefecture that participates in a startup visa program has a little bit different rules. So that's one of the things I help my clients understand is they say, okay, I want to start a business. It's a new business. Where in Japan can I start this? And so again, on my website, I took some time and listed every single startup visa in Japan. And I use that as a resource now with my clients and say, okay, well, you want to move to Yamagata, right? Well, I'm not sure that there's any visa there. Let's check. And maybe there's not. I can't remember off the top of my head.
So the startup visa was an initiative, I think, started in Fukuoka a couple of years ago. But it's interesting because you said it delays some of the difficult paperwork you need to do by just a few months.
Yeah.
But a startup usually needs some time, right?
Yeah.
Before it takes off. How has this visa, this new visa basically been working since it's been implemented? Has it been like a successful opportunity for many, or is it like an underused visa?
I think it's definitely underused. One of my favorite case studies to see this visa in action while using an akiya and a short-term rental is some content producers called Benton Homestead. And they are really like the poster child for what you can do with a startup visa in Japan. It's interesting because, as we talked about, each location has different rules. If you want to have a business related to short-term rentals, it's better to find a prefecture or city that has no preference on an industry, and they happen to find one. And they were the very first to use that visa in this little town. It's called Imabari City, and it's in Shikoku. And so what they did is they bought 2 akiya, and one they're slowly fixing up, and the other they fixed up right away and using as their short-term rental. And on their website, they have a great walkthrough of how they did it. And I think one thing that was educational for me is one thing you can do, because the startup visa is so short, is you can kind of piggyback it with a short-term visa exemption. So you can go to Japan and do some non-revenue generating preparations, like talking to the city, buying houses, things like that. So by the time you get to your startup visa, you have some of the infrastructure and concept in place of what you're going to do.
So overall, it seems like these visa systems are relatively complex, right? And if you're not familiar with it, it's quite confusing. What visa can I get? How can I do this? And I guess this is where you come in to help to kind of navigate people through this. And for people that you've successfully helped navigate through this, and you've successfully helped find the right place for themselves to settle in Japan, what have been some of the common challenges you've been discussing with them after they've moved here and kind of started their new adventure?
I think one of the challenges that they have after moving here is, getting to revenue. Doing an akiya is especially a difficult business, and there's a lot of renovation involved. I think once you move here, you need to make sure that you have enough time to get to the revenue, and you have to have enough resources to make sure that you can keep going. One of the clients that I'm working with is planning on doing a construction business. And, for him, what he's looking at now with the city is making sure he has all the licenses in place too. So, Japan is a very rigid society, and whatever you're planning for a business, that's another benefit that I like with the startup visa program, is that it puts you in touch with the local government right away, so that if you have some idea, you can start vetting it with them and make sure it's legal where you are, and that wherever you establish it, it's in the right zone and things like that. And you have that rapport with the city or the prefecture right away, so that what you're doing has a better chance of success and that the city's involved already.
So startup visa giving you more time, but also giving you an opportunity to really network and kind of meet the right people you will need to help yourself be successful.
Exactly. And some of the startup visas too are a bit longer. Some of them are up to 12 months. And in the case of Fukuoka, they allow you to avoid the office space issue for 18 months.
Well, that's a pretty long time.
Yeah. So if you piggyback that on top of, a short-term visa, you could have 24 months of some flexibility there.
But that means you really need to plan your journey to Japan. You can't just come here on a whim and, okay, I'll do this, I'll try that. You need to know within what time frame you need to check certain boxes, such as, okay, I'll come on the tourist visa for 3 months. I need to talk to this and this and this to make the most use of these 24 months, because before you know it, it's going to be gone, and then it's going to be too late for you to renew if you haven't met the requirement for the next visa.
Yeah, exactly. It's definitely, the clock is ticking. And it also helps to have some experience with the thing that you're doing, both for your visa application and for actually being able to execute it. So one thing that I've been telling some of my clients already is, if they're planning on starting a completely new business, maybe get their feet wet where they live now first and try some things out. A lot of people are interested in short-term rentals. Maybe do a construction project at your home. Maybe renovate your own home and see how it goes. Some are interested in farming. Maybe grow some tomatoes. Maybe take them to a farmer's market and see if you can get with some friends and try out these businesses before jumping to a completely new place and hoping that it will work.
So it seems to me, from all the examples you're giving, that a lot of people have this interest, this dream, this attraction for akiya, for the rural lifestyle, rather than, I'll set up a new IT company in Tokyo.
I'd say it's about 50-50.
50-50. But for those people that are interested in this rural lifestyle and the akiya, I feel like it's really been romanticized.
Yeah.
Whether it's on social media, even mass media have talked about it multiple times. The amount of empty homes in Japan, the cheap prices, idyllic living conditions. We've talked to Anton here, who's renovating akiya on the podcast. We talked to Alex from Tokyo Portfolio, who works in the more luxury real estate segment in Tokyo. Is it really a dream, this akiya thing? Is it really realistic for most people that are interested in this? You gave the example earlier of it's a full-time job to renovate this free house.
Yeah.
So in the end, it's not that free anymore because it's using up all your time.
I think one thing to keep in mind that I don't think a lot of people realize about akiya is that it's a term that describes any house that's not lived in. So it could be a old house from the 1950s that's been sitting in the countryside for 20 years unused. It could also be a house that's just been empty for the last 6 months and could be relatively new. So one thing I like to preach moderation is I would avoid the really, really cheap houses if you don't have that experience. But there's also great deals to be had, especially outside Tokyo. You can find move-in ready houses for 80,000 to like 120,000, and for Western standards, that's still a very good deal.
I was just thinking right now, 80,000, 100,000. That's a lot when I think about
Yeah.
my standards of living here
Yeah, exactly.
in Japan. But coming from the United States with American salaries, that seems like a deal.
Very doable. Of course, the downside is you have to have that in cash because there's no financing available for foreigners in Japan, obviously, because
unless you live here.
Unless you live here, that's right. But it's still, I think, if you target one thing that one of the presenters said this week is target an easy win. Target something where it's not going to completely blow up your life. Maybe don't right away, especially if you don't speak Japanese, don't get some hovel that's free and some inaka that is going to really be difficult for you. What if you got even a condo in Osaka, and maybe it will cost $60,000-$100,000, but a lot of the infrastructure is in place. You have someone taking care of it. There's nothing to do with you don't have to deal with the roof. I think that especially if you're thinking about moving to Japan, maybe first make your living situation easier on yourself so that you're not overwhelmed. It's already going to be a big change coming from whatever country you're coming from to Japan. Maybe at the first stab, get a house that is going to be relatively easy for you to live in right away.
I want to get back to the beginning of Japan remotely. And the problem that kind of started your interest in this consulting business was the cost of living in the United States is very, very high. There is no safety net for people.
Correct.
No health insurance, retirement, pension fund. So you help these people relocate here. And they arrive here and they settle here and they start paying the taxes. How different is it really? We were talking about it's not apples and apples. You can't really compare. And I see this debate going on a daily basis. Is it really more comfortable, better here in Japan than in the United States?
Yeah, it's a big it depends. It always helps if you have money. So I feel like moving to Japan will be beneficial for those who have access to income or dollars outside of Japan. If you were to come to Japan with nothing and go get a job and live the same way the Japanese live, it's kind of a toss-up because you won't get as much money and you won't spend as much money. So it's a bit different. From my experience, I was like that. I was earning in Japan and living in Japan. One thing I will say is that I don't remember being so stressed about money because there is that net. And I lost my job once or twice in Japan and went through the system, and we call it unemployment here. We call it hello work. And I wasn't worried about like ending up on the street, for example. Whereas, especially in the United States, you're one or two accidents away from true financial ruin, which is terrifying. So I think there's definitely some stability, like economic stability benefits, even to those coming to Japan and not having an economic background. But I think it's really beneficial for people who have maybe some investments on the side, or maybe they have some work they could be doing remotely, and getting those dollars to come in and maybe funnel it through something like a Japanese organization that you can establish, a kabushiki gaisha or godo gaisha. And especially with the exchange rate now, if you have a cash flow of some dollars, it can really buoy your life in Japan, I feel like.
So for people interested in coming, basically your recommendation would be perhaps to spend a little bit more time building something overseas
Yes.
and then kind of taking that advantage with them to Japan instead of necessarily coming straight. But that being said, even if you come straight out of university and you start working here, you can live comfortably because you have those nets.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely trade-offs. There are lots of stories of people who come to Japan and don't live comfortably, especially when it comes to working in Japan. The experiences I've heard about can be horrible. That's why with my clients, I try to help them understand how to be their own boss and how to be independent from the Japanese employment system. I honestly don't recommend getting a job in Japan unless it's with like a foreign company or some special situation. Maybe you have some buddies doing it together and they hire you. It's very difficult. So I try to encourage my clients to either have some financial stability that they have and bring that over, or bring a new idea that they think can also bring some dollars to the table.
You've been doing this for a couple of years now. What are the things you'd like to be doing with Japan remotely moving forward? Any additional services, any additional kind of directions you want to take your project?
Good question. I think the next thing that I have in mind is, like a lot of people are doing, is making some sort of course for people. I'm really inspired about what the Benton Homestead did with their akiya. And I know that there's a lot of interest in low-cost akiyas. I'm thinking about having like a course that goes step by step how to do it, from concept to purchasing the property to getting revenue to listing it, and then to getting your visa.
So real estate business model blueprint. So
Exactly, like a blueprint. Another thing that I'm interested in is one of the guys I met at the real estate summit, Matt Ketchum.
I've met him once.
Oh, okay. Yeah, he's really cool. He does tours of akiyas. And so one idea that I have, and I haven't even talked to him about this yet, but I'd really like to introduce my clients to these tours so that before they go out and try to do something on their own, again, like a blueprint, they see how it can be done. And they can understand, do I want to move to Japan and do this? Or do I want to do this part-time and come and live in it myself for maybe 3-4 months a year and then rent it out the rest of the time to other people? So I think those types of like try before you buy experiences will help people decide whether or not they truly want to move to Japan or not.
But now my big question for you, after 10 years here, moving back to the US, facing those financial challenges, the stress of the high bills, the accidents that could ruin your financial stability. Are you planning to move back to Japan eventually? Is this also something you're building for yourself?
Exactly. I'm basically drinking my own Kool-Aid. I'm also very interested in the FIRE movement. I think that I'd like to retire in Japan and stretch those dollars longer. I've got a couple kids and I'm looking at colleges in the United States. And I'm like, how am I going to afford to live here and send them to college? So one idea is that I come back to Japan and live very cheap, and they can spend all my money at, maybe they'll get into Stanford or something, who knows, and go spend all my money, and I can just chill in the countryside. I don't mind being in the countryside.
Back in Totori, where it kind of...
Yeah, that would be awesome. I think even me, I wouldn't go back to the true rural area. I really like cities that are like sub 100,000 people, but still have some of the infrastructure. Like I remember when we lived in Tottori, we would always hang out in Yonago City. And Yonago is not on anybody's tourist map, really.
It's a very nice town, though.
But it's wonderful. And there's a great community of people that live there. There's Mount Daisen. Cities like that where you have a lot of the things that you'd need, but not completely rural.
Thank you, Nick. I think we covered a lot of topics today, and we could have gone deeper in different areas about why people move here, how to move here, the business blueprint you're trying to build. Is there one thing that's maybe important in what you do that you'd like people to know that I haven't really asked about, that we didn't get to talk about? Or did we get the general picture correct?
I think one thing is that the main thing that I provide is somebody to talk to about it. I've been looking at this a long time, and I'm excited about it. And first and foremost, I try to be a voice of hope and a voice of reason for people to come and say, oh, I heard about this on the internet. Can I do that? And, I hope to give people a straight answer and hope to be able to guide them. I think there's a lot of, like we talked about, wild information about akiya, about moving to Japan, about horror stories of, karoshi in the office. What I like to do with people is both calm their fears and show them that it's possible, while maybe tempering some of those expectations.
Thank you, Nick. I hope that our listeners that are maybe now interested or have been interested got a lot of interesting information out of our conversation today, and we'll make sure to link back to your website where they can find more and reach out if they want a voice of reason and if they want to talk to you and kind of find out more. Thank you for coming today.
Absolutely.
Thank you everyone for listening and watching. This was Unpacking Japan, and we'll be back again next week.
Mata ne.
Bye. Are you looking for another podcast episode to listen to next? If you like the one you just listened to, I'm sure you'll also enjoy the one that I've selected and linked in the description down below. Go check it out.